Hello, everyone, and welcome to Strictly Speaking, conversation with theater makers. This is Eric Tysinger. He is a dear friend of mine and equity stage manager. He's from Fort Worth, Texas right now, and Eric is a North Carolina native. He's also worked with regional theaters, Disney, Broadway, national tours. So, Eric, welcome to the show.
Thank you guys for having me. It's so good to be here.
Right. So, as you're going through the show tonight, y'all, just if you're from out of state or if you're alumni, let us know in the chat where you're coming from, where you're watching us from, just so we can say hey to you. So, let's get started, Eric.
Let's do it.
What's a stage manager? What does that mean to you? And what does that role? What does a stage manager do? Talk to us.
Yeah, no, it's a good question, and there's so many different answers to it. You know, for me, Josh, I've always looked at it as there needs to be a person in every production that is the sort of bad version would be the toilet seat of it all, and the more positive version is sort of this central hub of information sharing and communication. One of the things that artists are sometimes great at and sometimes not are being able to share ideas and get information out quickly, because as you can imagine, a lighting designer, sound designer, director, everybody's working on multiple projects at once, and they want to be able to dump some information to a central location and know that that information is going to get out, get shared, keep the process moving forward, organized, and hopefully calm and not chaotic. And so I've always looked at sort of stage management as a central hub for a production. I sort of operate under this macro principle of stage management that is sort of you manage the process and lead the people. I feel like the people are a big part of stage management, and a lot of times we can get lost in the weeds of nuts and bolts and Excel world and all that. But I feel like that central hub is important.
So tell us about, just really quickly, what makes up a stage management team, those positions, but also at what point in the process do you start with the show?
Yeah, we'll start with the second part of that question. So typically speaking, if you're doing a regional theater production, depending on the contract, if it's an equity production, you can sometimes start as quick as 2 days before. Typically speaking, it's about a week before. So you go on contract a week before the actors join, and that week is what is referred to as a prep week. And that prep week is essentially the first time that you're officially getting paid working on a show. I am sad to say that we don't really get paid for all of the work we do prior to that first official week. And it does, the job does require usually some administrative work prior to that first official week. And then from there, in terms of building a team, depending on the size of the production, you can have one assistant, or you can have some of the projects we're going to look at today. Fly, for example, we're going to look at in a little bit. That was a team of 4 equity stage managers and 4 PAs at one point when we were in production.
And PA, go ahead and tell us what PA means.
Yeah, so production assistant. So in the stage management world, you have a production stage manager referred to as the PSM. You're going to hear Josh and folks refer to, or see in bios and whatnot, you'll see sometimes a PSM, production stage manager. You'll see a stage manager, which is what my official sort of billing was on Hamilton. What that means is contractually, it's called the first assistant stage manager. Now, in the regional world, you're just assistant stage managers. And quite frankly, in the commercial world, you're just assistant stage managers as well. And then from there, you have production assistants, interns, and varying degrees of apprentices that can help support a production. Typically, the production assistant's entry-level kind of position. I love to open that up to high school students when I was in Texas, and certainly at the commercial Broadway world, your PAs are often folks who have college degrees.
Awesome.
So a wide range.
So remember, everyone, we have the Q&A going, so please feel free to ask questions as we go. So Eric, speaking of, an entry level, how did you get your start in theater, or, more to the point, stage management?
Yep, that's a great question. I'll try to give you the quickest version I can. In high school, I was exposed to theater very, very late. Theater is not something that was I was an athlete. I was a wrestler, football player, baseball player. High school drama teacher said, I was in choir with my elective. He came and said, hey, we want to do Camelot. And I said, awesome. I have no idea what that is or what that means. He's like, basically, I'm doing a show with a lot of guys. I need you. And I said, okay, I don't know how I can do that with football and all this other stuff. He said, hey, if you want to do it, I'll figure your schedule out. So I didn't know what I was signing up for. So this is probably the second week of this thing. I got out of football practice 6 o'clock, took off my pads, had a little bite, got to play practice, and next thing I know, he sends me into a bathroom with some tights and a tunic to put on for my costume. Now, that was my entry to theater. I was like, I don't know what this is. So you fast forward the next week, he put me in the show as this knight. Now, I'm a big dude. I'm 6'3", 300 pounds. He put me in the show as this guy who gets killed in the joust in Camelot. And I got killed. We were blocking the scene. I got killed. He killed me center stage, right? Big crowd scene. Then he had this moment of panic on his face when he realized he had just killed this large dude in the middle of the stage, and I'm supposed to be dead. He's got to get me off the stage. So we took a break. He took a 10-minute break. He came up to me during the break, put his arm around me, said, hey, I just want you to know we're going to do this again when we come back, and you're going to die over there by them curtains because we got to get you off of the stage. And so after that production of Camelot, he came up to me and said, hey, I got this thing like some good community theater in the summer. I'd like for you to stage manage. And I said, I guess that's your way of telling me I should not perform anymore. And so anyway, that was my introduction to stage management. And then fast forward 2 years, I had a full ride to nursing school at the University of North Carolina at Greensboro. I started nursing school. My first year, they wanted you to get out your arts elective. They said, hey, your choices are going to be sculpting one, drawing one, or a technical theater class. And I don't draw and I don't sculpt. So I guess tech theater it is. I went to Taylor Theater there at UNCG. I met Eric Stevie one day up on the loading bridge. He, of course, thought I was loading bridge. For those of you who don't know, it's 60 feet in the air. You throw in weights onto counterweight rigging systems. Not a fun job. It's what they always give to the freshmen, the people who, they're like, oh yeah, you get to go up there, you earn your stripes. Well, I was jazzed about this, right? Like I was like overly excited about it. And Eric Stevie, who is a good friend of ours, said to me, hey, why don't you come next door to the Roadhouse? We could probably use you over there. Got hired part-time. Pretty soon I was missing my homework in the nursing school to do the technical theater stuff. And I found that I needed to just make the switch. So I swapped over. I knew that stage management had the skill set for me in terms of organization, communication, people skills, so I didn't look back really. At that point, I had some really good, fortunate things happen early on. I got to go to the Williamstown Theater Festival, which is where I probably advanced, everything in my career comes back to that one summer. And that was for free. I made not a dollar. In fact, I had to pay $250 to work there for a summer. But at the end of the day, 18, 19 years later, it's all because I did that. I also very quickly after that got connected with Walt Disney World's entertainment. I got to be in an inaugural class of entertainment apprentices, which was a program they interviewed. I don't know. They told us at the time it was about 12,000 folks that interviewed across the country. And I happened to be very fortunate to be selected as one of the first 12 participants in that program. And essentially the way they were looking at it is Disney was experimenting with the notion of training young entertainment personnel cheaply. So we got paid and quite frankly, didn't get paid terribly for a college position. And the idea was if you wanted to stick around for a job or there were job openings that perhaps you would then be trained and you could enter at technical, what they would call Tech 3, a Tech Level 3, and they would have just paid you, a small amount to learn the basic entry Disney skills. The trade-off was we got to pretty much do anything we wanted to do in terms, we could request to do anything, be statused at any stage. I love these pictures. It's taking me back right here. This is Fantasmic. Fantasmic was my second assignment at Walt Disney World. You're seeing some pictures here from a combination of Disney World, Disneyland. Same sort of idea in the show, but a little different theater setup between the two parks. Anyway, I got status here. I did this. I got to do a couple of huge corporate events. I was in the rafters of Indiana Jones Spectacular on New Year's Eve of the millennium, 2000. Never forget that. Hey, just in case you're wondering, it's really loud when you're next to a metal roof at Disney World on New Year's Eve. So I was up pulling power for a loadout, and it all happened right there, and I couldn't hear for probably a good 24 hours. So yeah.
So there you are, and then next thing you know, you're production stage manager for.
I get I get here and there, get a little Broadway gig, and then one thing led to another, and I ended up being able to tour with Hamilton, and that's the most recent thing I've done.
Well, since we're talking about Disney a little bit, you were mentioning that you had your most embarrassing, or
oh gosh,
how do you want to say
I knew you were gonna do this to me. So the thing about knowing Josh is, of course, he knows all the secrets. So you you can't sneak one by. So anyway, I don't know how many of you know the show. Oh my gosh, is there a clip? Oh boy, there's a clip. Okay, so here we are in Fantasmic. Josh, I can't believe you're doing this to me. So here we are in Fantasmic. So Mickey is about to kill this dragon. Now, the thing you need to know about running Fantasmic is right above this dragon's head is a gigantic steel structure that you have to sort of run around. Pause for just a second, Josh. I'm going to give it a little landscape if we're going to do this. Might as well do it right. Yeah, so when you do this track, you set this sword that we're about to see that Mickey's going to ultimately kill the dragon. Now, you do that back during one of the water screen scenes in the Pocahontas section. And at this particular moment, I'm on the rock above the dragon's head. I've just done a stage management task up there. That's right. And then you are running for your life over stage left to get behind the island to get on the boat that's about to come around. Now, so I'm doing this and I'm listening to the show in the headset. Now go ahead and play it, Josh. I know you'll get a kick out of it.
So I don't think it's the actual one, but
I've preset this. No, this, thank God. Hopefully nobody has a clip of that. I preset this sword, and Mickey comes out here in just a second to kill this dragon. And they did not tell me to remove the cover off the tip of the sword. Now they put a little cover on it to keep the pyro dry, because they want the pyro to go off and he kills the dragon. Well, they didn't tell me to take the cover off. All they did was say, put the sword in the stone during this scene. So I did. And go ahead and play the results. So Mickey comes out, the music is building, the dragon is, terrifying. And
are you able to see it, Eric?
I can see it. Yeah. We probably need I think it's a little past this. Do we have one more little scene?
No, that was it. I think, he shot the pyro.
So when he shot, I see. When he shoots that sword off, the black sheath off the sword went flying into the moat. And all I heard on the headset was, oh man, who forgot to take the cover off the sword again? And so it made me feel a little better that I wasn't the first one to do it. But certainly the most embarrassing moment of my young journey. There were many more to come, but that was the worst to date.
Well, we've got a couple of questions popping up so far, and we're going to get to you, Griffin, and an anonymous attendee a little later as we work through some of the stuff. So Griffin, I see you, and we're going to talk about that as we get into some of his touring stuff. But so one show I'd like to talk to you about, Eric, is Fly. You guys did that at the Dallas Theater Center.
Dallas Theater Center, Yep, Tony Award-winning regional theater here in Texas.
Could you tell us a bit about the story of the show itself?
Yeah, so, there have been many retellings, sort of imaginings of the Peter Pan story. And this one is one that was conceived by Jeffrey Seller, who is the producer of shows like Rent, Hamilton, In the Heights. And so he's a very successful Broadway producer, had not done a lot of directing. And he came up with this idea that he wanted to approach Peter Pan from sort of a retelling from Wendy's perspective, and the idea of sort of a growing up story or a coming of age story from the female perspective. The book was written by Reaves Joseph and Kirsten Childs. Reaves Joseph, you might have heard of a play called Bengal Tiger at the Baghdad Zoo, is probably one of his more famous ones with Robin Williams. Anyway, so the show is set in sort of this young lady's imagination of a Neverland, and the design by Ana Luisos here you'll see is this bamboo world. This is our Neverland world. And, you know, one of the things as a stage manager, you sort of never, you never want to hear, or maybe you do, if you're excited about big stuff, you sort of get this pitch like, hey, you're going to do this show called Fly with Jeffrey Seller. It's this big thing. Here's some pictures of this set. The cast is 50% kids, 10, 11, 12-year-olds. Your set's made out of entirely bamboo. Now, the thing about bamboo is, as you can see there, it's probably meant to skewer meat with and cook on a grill. It's not really friendly for shows. And I'll tell you what it's really not friendly for are shows with 240 automated flying cues around that bamboo. Without a doubt, the most complicated thing, Josh, that I have ever done. This show, a lot of you, probably know about a tech process or have heard of tech, and some people, stage managers, tend to love that or hate it. A lot of folks, actors tend to hate it because it's more about tech than acting. This particular show, the scene, I think Josh has got us a scene we're going to watch here in just a second, took us 42 hours of tech time to tech. So we're at the top of the show. How
long was this one scene that took 42 hours?
One scene's probably, I don't know, is it 10 minutes, 8 minutes? And we spent 42 hours, almost an entire week of tech on this one particular song. You'll see as we get into this here why it's so complicated.
I'm going to change one view real fast so we can see something else. Let's see.
So this show, guys, just so you know, is lit by the late, just passed away, Hal Binkley. This is a Hal Binkley design. The music in the pit conducting right there, this performance is Kirk Crowley, who is an assistant of Alex Lacamoire, who is a musical genius behind Dear Evan Hansen, Hamilton, In the Heights, The Greatest Showman. Anyway, this is their product. The choreography is Andy Blankenbuehler, choreographed Hamilton. You'll see as the curtain rises here some of the movement. You can probably pick out some moves that are in Hamilton for those of you that like Hamilton and see it. And Josh has got up here a little bit of the call script. This is an older version of it. It's not super cleaned up, so please don't judge me. But this is a digital version that I created in Word. I'm gonna see if I can move some things out of the way to see a little bit of it, Josh. Just give me a sec. So right here, it's our first cue. So preset, we've got some flying happening right away. Scrub forward just a little bit here. We'll just get to the juice. So this is just all dancing around. You can watch them. The very Andy Blankenbuehler choreography. Watch for a sec here.
And so I see this foy here. Foy is your
flying cues. That's your flying stuff. This is a pirates coming on. This is sort of, so the idea here, guys, is she's in her nightmare, right? She's in her dream world. She's in her bedroom having this nightmare / dream state of Neverland. All right, you can scrub a little bit if you want. So it's very, you can see the choreography is very Andy, not easy. Good. Yep. Fast forward just a little bit. So right at the end of this section, back up just a little bit. Sorry, we're gonna miss the yeah. So what happens right here, guys, is probably what this took a whole 2 days. So Captain Hook has to get on stage here, and right after that, Peter has to appear from behind the bed and cut his hand off. The origin story of the Hook, right? So one of the things that has to happen is Hook has to be in her bedroom for storytelling purposes. The connection to the bed is important. Now, if you'll watch right here in just a sec, this bed's going to come forward. The footlights in the back, they're going to go dark. If you'll look up stage left, you'll see a little shadow start to appear. Look right as they move. It's coming. See it right there? That's Peter and a technician having to get out on stage in the middle of this gigantic prologue. One of the trees, the Amazon ladies, if you will, they have hooked him up behind there now, and Hook's going to stand up. He's basically about to harm Wendy, and he comes up And you'll watch me call late like Hughes is preview number 2. See, that was late right there. That should have been a little earlier. But he cuts his hand off. Now, watch here. See how he's got ropes to his sides? So now you got to remember, we've got a 12-year-old boy who's not experienced with flying. He's not experienced with a lot of theater in general. And we have now hooked him up. We've hooked ropes to his sides. We've hooked ropes to his back. And he now has to go up straight into the, in between 2 electrics and land on a catwalk up there. He has to get, right now he's getting unclipped. He then has to run over to the catwalk, come down 3 flights of stairs, and be ready to enter in this bedroom scene. So all of what you just saw, now we scrubbed through a little bit of it. I think I said it was probably about an 8-minute segment. That took us 42 hours of tech time.
Wow.
And this, oh, this is a great one, Josh. This is a good one. So now this clip is how we rehearsed this flying moment prior to tech. So now this is 2 months before we were in production. This is in SUNY Purchase up in New York. And we basically rented out the theater. We brought in some very basic equipment, and we sort of created a dialogue. You see this guy downstairs left in yellow pulling those ropes. The idea that we never really captured in this first incarnation was that the trees, the dancers of this Neverland world, were responsible for Peter's movement in some way, right? They were tied, the ropes were tied to their movement. And we didn't really capture that in the clip we just saw in production. They ended up capturing it a lot better in the second incarnation of the show, which actually was on stage at La Jolla Playhouse when the pandemic shutdown happened. Actually, they only got 2 performances in. But terrifying, thrilling, hardest thing I've ever done, most exhausted I've ever been, scariest show I've ever called. You know, Hamilton in some ways is relatively simple comparatively. Yeah.
So you took us from nursing school all the way up to, you know, the hardest show you ever done. And you contribute a lot of that to your Williamstown, as you said. Your
That's right.
experience there.
That's right.
We have an anonymous attendee is asked the question.
Oh, it's a great.
You
question.
mentioned that you got your start from Williamstown.
Yes.
Are internships that are unpaid or cost money fairly widespread, or is it possible to get reasonably paid work when starting out? What are your thoughts on them?
So I tell a lot of young stage managers that you need to be open to understanding the opportunity it's presented in relation to the money. Okay, so what I mean by that is if you're about to go to this, and Santa Fe is a bad example because I think they have a paid internship program, but and at this point there are there are less and less unpaid internships. It's not as common of a practice. But if Santa Fe Opera or Williamstown is going to say, hey, we want you to come apprentice or do your training with us, but we can't pay you but $100 a week. When I got my list of shows, you have to understand, you know, I was going to be working. The very first show I did was with Michael Greif, was with Blythe Danner, Gwyneth Paltrow's mom. It was Anne Reinking, who, you know, a Fosse dancer who originated the role in Chicago, the musical. That was my first show. My second show was with Richard Burton's daughter, Kate Burton, was a show that was already transferring to Broadway. My third show was with Christopher Ashley, who is the artistic director at La Jolla Playhouse now. He's done, I mean, his most recent project you might have all heard about is he's responsible for, Lord, I'm good,
But it's somebody, it's something, yeah.
Yeah, no, my point is you need to weigh what you're being offered versus the experience you're getting. And I knew very quickly that was worth not getting paid for. And as it happened, the woman I assisted, the second show I assisted there, Hedda Gabler, was stage managed by a professor at Yale. And she ended up teaching the woman who hired me for my first professional job. Now, the way that worked is they came to UNCG one day and they were doing a seminar on their theater management class. And the managing director came, and I had just been taught to be bold. And so I brought a resume that day, and at the end of class, I walked up to him and said, hey, I know you guys are 6-8 months away from opening, but here's a resume. I would love to know if you had an internship program in production. I'm interested in stage management. Well, sure enough, 8 months later, the woman who was the production manager opened the theater, called and said, we'd like to talk to you about a job. And I actually said to her, I said, I think it's awesome that you guys have an internship program already. And she said, no, we want to give you an equity contract. So Laura Brown then called me. Laura Brown's a lady I worked with at Williamstown. She called and said, hey, I just got your first job. Don't F it up. And that was the last conversation on the phone I actually have ever had with her. She and I have stayed in touch, but that's the last phone call we actually had. So it all goes back to that, right? So it was worth it. Now, if small theater somewhere wants you to sort of be free labor, but there's no real training, it's like, hey, we just want you to come do this because we need somebody in the position. That's when I start to get a little antsy about not getting paid and what are you really getting out of it, if that makes any sense.
Yeah.
It's a great question.
Yeah. So you mentioned that Fly had shut down at La Jolla. We have another question from an anonymous attendee. How have you adapted to producing theater virtually?
I don't know that I have, as in completed the process. I am currently, just got a call yesterday actually from a producer friend of mine in Charlotte, North Carolina, who is figuring it out, as well, and said, hey, we've got a gig that's doing a simulcast. And one of the things we're learning with our simulcast clients is we need to send somebody out to be in a room, even though it's 2 or 3 people. We need somebody to make sure the equipment's working. We need to make sure that somebody has, where are the people where's the talent, so to speak, and deal with any changes in the master program schedule at a very small remote place. So it's about finding work like that. Unfortunately, it's not a lot. It's it's small stuff in between. Right now, I've sort of attached myself to a couple of directors and big picture thinkers who have projects that are starting to be talked about when hopefully we can be a little safer and be in person. So I've done a lot of free planning right now, to be honest with you.
So you use the term attached yourself. Like, what do you mean by that? And how can students, network essentially is what it sounds like.
No, I'm glad you picked up on it. Networking is the right word. One of the things that the biggest piece of advice or things that I can share with anyone interested in this tonight is you have to be bold and not be afraid of meeting people and shaking a hand and introducing yourself. The worst thing that's going to happen is someone's going to scowl at you. They're going to say, I don't have time for you. They're going to brush you off. And that's going to be once. If you're smart, you'll let that be and you won't approach that person again. But it's only going to happen once. The flip side is you might find someone, I had a lady, my version of that was Kathy Purvis, who came to UNCG to launch a very, very small tour of Vagina Monologues from UNCG. I recognized her right away. I introduced myself right away. She knew me as a stage manager. She asked me what I'd done. I had mentioned Williamstown. I was with them the entire week. And she ultimately is one of the biggest PSMs in the commercial world and has been an advisor. And so my point is that attaching yourself to Kathy Purvis as an acquaintance, she was willing to give me advice and has remained willing to do that 18 years later. I could text her right now. She did Spider-Man. She was one of the 2 PSMs of Spider-Man, the Broadway extravaganza. Her list is a mile long, but I have her as a resource because I was willing to take that moment to introduce myself and say hello. And so these directors that I've attached myself to, I've just, one of them is an older gentleman who is probably going to be an artistic director at a regional theater in the next couple of years. He's done lots of things all over the country, but he's not very good at computer skills. And so I've attached myself to him by being useful to him as an assistant, right? Like right now, like just before I jumped on with y'all, he called and said, I'm trying to add a Google folder to my Google Classroom for plays. And he's like, I don't know, help, and so Flip side of that is now when and yesterday got a big production for Christmas at St. Andrew's Church right here in Plano, Texas. And he called and said, hey, I got a call today. I need you to help me put this thing together. And so, and that's how it happens. You know?
Well, we've got two questions that kind of go hand in hand here.
Yeah, sure.
As I've told you in the past, that NC State doesn't actually have a majors program for theater.
Yep.
And, you know, a lot of what I'm hearing, this attachment, this networking that you talk about requires access, which a lot of times happens through getting a major and then being placed out into the world. So for our students here at NC State, and as a person yourself in the field, how could, or is there any advice you could give about how a non-theater major could be bold and could get that connection, that networking?
Yeah, so you are right to say that you don't have what I'm going to use an example in North Carolina. You don't have the ability to come up and shake a hand and say, I'm from North Carolina School of the Arts. That's not in your toolbox. But here's the great thing. If you've done production work and you have participated in work at North Carolina State, you can frame that in a conversation with someone just as easily. You can say, hey, I have been doing theater with North Carolina State. That verbiage, they're not going to care about. They're going to go, oh, here's somebody who's been doing it for a college program and has interest, right? So sometimes that's about approach. You know, if you approach that with enthusiasm and confidence, and in some ways you have to approach it as though you don't know a whole lot, even though you may know a whole lot, right? Like you have to humble yourself and to these people because you need their network, you need their advice. So my suggestion would be, do not let the fact that you can't lead with, I'm a theater major, stop you from reaching out to those regional theater programs. I know that you know a lot of people and are connected with a lot of theater companies and know how to help these folks find those summer internship programs. And that's a big piece of this puzzle that I'm sure you push, and I certainly will back that up right here tonight is, guys, you got to use your summers. You got to use your summers to your advantage. That's where you build the big network, and you need to not sell yourself short by shooting for places like Santa Fe Opera, the Williamstown Theater Festival, your SETC, those kinds of opportunities. You're going to get the interview, right? That's the way they're set up. They're not going through their interview list going, oh, North Carolina State, we're not going to talk to that person, you know? And so you need to be prepared when you walk in that room with the tools that any theater artist has, or young collegiate theater artist, not worried about, oh, how do I navigate the fact that we don't have a major, you know? I don't think that's as...
And, you know, this kind of goes to the second question that was asked. How many people have you worked with have theater degrees and how many don't? Or do you know?
I would say 60-40 theater degrees to not theater degrees. It's a pretty large percentage of folks who don't have a degree in theater who certainly I've worked with in the IA on crews. A lot of those folks are apprentice-based, sort of experience-based positions, folks who've come up in the ranks who maybe not have had any formal education. And that's sort of the brilliant thing of what we do, right? Isn't it, Josh? Like, you know, the education helps you with the network, but at the end of the day, it's sort of the experience and how well you can navigate people. And are you a pleasure to work with? You know, do you know enough stuff to be helpful in a collaborative team? You know, that's what's sort of great about it, is you may not have to have that formal education.
Great. And let's see here. So you did say, you spoke about the Vagina Monologues preparing to go on tour.
Yeah.
Griffin asks, how do you adapt your paperwork for a touring production?
It's a great question. So Griffin, I'm gonna adapting paperwork is not necessarily, in other words, the prop list isn't going to really change, right? Like the prop list is the prop list. It's a working document in terms of once the show's set, the show is set. What I will say is the thing about touring or any show that has sustained itself for any period of time beyond opening, the tasks that stage managers tend to do or what you do on a daily basis are a lot different, right? Because Hamilton is a sort of a bad example of this because we're in rehearsal all the time at Hamilton. Like we replace swings, understudy, we're in rehearsal every day. We can rehearse 5 hours a day, and then we take a dinner break, and then we come back and do the show 8 times a week. That's that. But you're not reteching. You don't do any of your rehearsals with really tech until you get to a put in. So the adapting of paperwork is things like, Josh, do you have that chair chart?
The chair chart?
Yeah, so the shift plot, the rehearsal shift plot.
Sorry.
Yeah, yes. I mean, well, we call it the chair. You probably it's labeled the chair chart because that's how it started.
It certainly is.
So I think this was Griffin's question, right?
Yes.
So Griffin, one of the things that we were able to do at Hamilton is take the items that are touched by actors, and there's quite a bit of prop. I can't remember, it's 513 props on the prop list for the show, and that counts every piece of paper, and there's a lot of paper. But you'll keep scrolling, Josh. This is great. So this is literally a moment by moment plan of what happens to each of the chairs. These brown sort of orangey squares that you see are chairs moving around. That big pallet upstage right there is the pallet that the furniture gets delivered on. And who moves it. So like you'll see, can you zoom in right there on that M1? That M1 right there is man 1. So that's ensemble male 1. And what that does is allow us to jump any point in the show. We can sort of have a real good understanding of where the chairs need to be, where it's such a detail, but this blue box that is up here by man 1, that blue box is used about 4 or 5 times in the show. And believe it or not, coming around that corner, it's important when you're rehearsing it to know whether that blue box is there or not, because it's a different traffic pattern, right? So anyway, this is a good example of adapting paperwork for a long-range show. If you were doing a show, let's just stop right here for a second, because this little thing right here is a masterpiece. This was created by a stage manager named Steve Henry, or Paco, if those of you out there who know Paco. You would not do this for a show that's running for 3 weeks. First of all, it probably takes you 3 weeks to create something that is accurate, because the way you create this is you watch an archival video on repeat, like you just literally second by second you have to watch, because you're tracking 11 ensemble, and all 11, let me just make sure I'm not lying to you. I don't know is man 6, do you see an M6, Josh? I don't know if man 6 is in this one.
Must be in this point.
Could be on the balcony somewhere. Could not. Oh yeah, there's man 6 right there. Man 6 is doing this little chair move up here. I think that's man 6. Anyway, my point is, this is all 11 ensemble members plus some principal roles moving stuff at once. You're not going to do that from memory. This is going to require some support, especially coming out of production. So that's a good example of how we adapt. The other thing, Josh, I'd love to look at to answer a little more detail of Griffin's question. We were talking about different tasks stage managers do on a long-running show as opposed to a short run. One of the things that we do are onboarding paperwork, because oddly enough, you get new cast members all the time. It is important for stage management to keep track of things like, let's just look, this is a great example. Like, here's a good example, sliders. So sliders are on the cast board out in the lobby. So we have to know that when we get a new cast member, as soon as we get them, we need to go ahead and get that magnet strip ordered. Do they have a script? Have we actually called them? I mean, listen, I know this sounds silly, but when you're doing a show that requires this much maintenance, reminding yourself with a simple checklist, have I actually called this actor and told them, welcome to the show and here's some information? So that's why you see stuff like, are they on the security door list? And so this is a great piece of paperwork for a show that is long running, that we've had to make you wouldn't necessarily do this for a 3-week run, if that makes any sense. So Griffin, I hope that helps answer your question. There's varying degrees. There's lots of conversation in stage management world about how pretty your paperwork is or is not, and I tend to lean towards let's make sure the people are taken care of. And if you're not so great at the paperwork, maybe there's somebody else who is really good at making it pretty. But nobody's really going to judge you a ton in stage management on how pretty the document is. That's just my personal preference. Sorry if I offended anyone.
So yeah, thank you, Eric. And before we jump into looking at a few more Hamilton items,
Yeah.
I do want to go back to internships. We've had a couple of questions here. And I'm just going to read it out loud for everyone. I understand that it's important for prospective interns to evaluate the experience they will gain when considering unpaid or underpaid internships. But shouldn't there be more responsibility placed on the theater companies to provide fair wage instead of creating financial barriers to gatekeep people from theater experiences? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, no, it's a great one. I absolutely believe that this is a problem in the American, specifically in the regional theater movement. I tend to think that the problem doesn't exist as much in the commercial world until you look at the until you define what a fair wage is if you're working in New York City, right? Like $500 a week in New York City is like paying someone $100 a week in, North Carolina. But to that question, a great comment, and certainly did not mean to take away any of the responsibility on theaters. I do believe a fair wage is a fair wage, whether your level of experience is high or not. You're still doing the work, I think, is what this person is perhaps indicating. And so I do agree. I do support a movement towards fair wage. I guess the only thing I would say is if I'm a young person and I'm looking at dealing with what's in front of me right now, meaning until the legislation or until the responsibilities of until there is some movement in the theater to pay that fair wage, that leaves me with sort of dealing with, well, what do I do right now when that's not the case, right? And so my decision-making process right now, until that gap gets proper, would be to use that sort of evaluation for someone. That doesn't excuse it, I guess, is my point.
Of course. And we also have another question here. Do you prefer working in one location or traveling to different locations for a show? The same thing versus excitement or stress and having to adapt.
Yeah. My personal preference is absolutely loving to travel and change it. And here's why touring is so awesome. This is so good, right? Like when you go to a city, I'm not going to name any cities in case it's your favorite city, but there are certain cities that are less exciting to be in than others. But the great news is you're not there for long. So you always get to change. If I'm, and I know, I mean, I love New York theater. I've lived in New York. This is not to say anything bad about New York, but New York can be a grueling place to live and work, right? And if you're doing a Broadway show that's a long range, you're there. You're tied to New York City. You could take a break, you could take leaves of absence, that kind of stuff, but you're tied to that. On tour, if you're in, I won't say one, but if you're in X city and you're like, oh my God, this crew is terrible, or oh my gosh, it's freezing cold, or you get to change. So my personal preference is to move around. It does mean a little more work, perhaps, because you're constantly retraining. But I think that keeps it fresh for me. You know what I mean? I love the idea when I get to a new city of taking you take a terrified wardrobe crew member who's, an actor literally in Hamilton, for example, those coats. I mean, we just literally, you hold the coat up and somebody runs, puts their arms in and goes, and you sort of get to give them a little breath and give them, I'm a big cheerleader for them, when I'm training, and I love to give them some sort of love and support them and really watch them get a hold of the show. And again, if you get a bad one, you're only stuck with them for, in my case, 3 weeks.
Yeah, and speaking of 3 weeks, because Hamilton operates a little differently than a lot of national tours.
Yeah, sure.
I mean, the fact that we talked to Josh Tower 2 weeks ago, and, he mentioned a bit about how there's a second set for every leg of the tour that moves around, which is a luxury, as I understand it.
Correct. It is absolutely a luxury.
So having worked on multiple tours yourself, one being Hamilton and other shows, can you speak to what's a typical day like for say Hamilton when you said you do a put in, which you mean you arrive in the city.
Put a new, yeah. Mm-hmm.
You're sat.
Yeah.
What's a typical day for Hamilton, and what's a typical day for most, the majority of touring productions?
Yeah, so a couple. I mean, there's well, we could have a whole hour on that conversation, but a couple of highlights, I guess. For us on the Hamilton tour, it's a fully staffed tour, and by that I mean every department is fully staffed. That is not necessarily true on every tour. In other words, you might have a department head on one tour, but that's it. You don't have you pick up a local crew member as your support structure, or you may, because the tour is, traveling every night, you may not get somebody who's experienced on that kind of schedule because they don't want to travel every other day. Hamilton, we're very spoiled in that way, right? Happy to admit that's an ideal scenario. So typical load in for us. So we close on a Sunday night performance. Our particular tour, this varies a little bit, but Angelica closes on a Sunday night. Show goes down at 10 o'clock. And the crew starts load out at 10:30. They work overnight till 7 a.m. Then they travel from about 8 a.m. to 2 p.m., whether that by bus or air, depending on the leap. And then they load in the rest of Monday. My job as a stage manager, I come in on Monday, depending on the city, with the PSM, and we set up the office because it's important to be able to have phone and internet immediately. You have to assign the dressing room so that wardrobe and hair can do their work. And then we make sure we know how to get around the building, because one of our first big tasks on Tuesday is going to be how do we get in, how do we get around, where do we meet, what's the schedule. Then on Tuesday, our opening day in the new city, believe it or not, we do actor meeting at 5:30, essentially orientation. We go right into sound check from I guess the meeting's at 5:15, sound check at 5:30. At 6:30, we do about 6 quick changes, 5 to 6 quick changes, depending on what we want to do. And then we go right into half hour and the show is moving. So that's a typical load in. I do things like I focus the moving lights. I'm part of the moving light focus for our tour. Do a lot of safety walks. It's like making sure that everything gets secured, because a crew working overnight. And then, so that's a big load in section for us. And then a typical day, once we get loaded in, we rehearse from 12 to 5, break from 5 to 5:45. We split the stuffer duties. So one of the things that happens in the commercial world is stage management's usually responsible for creating the stuffer that goes in the playbill, at this performance that you all are used to seeing. We did that on our tour. That's a very common thing. So we have to start that production at 5:45, get it to front of house so they can stuff 3,000 programs. Then we run the show. Then we do a report. We go to bed and we get up, back at the theater, 11:30, 12 o'clock rehearsal, and on we go. We don't rehearse on 2 show days unless it's an emergency. And on a load-in week, we don't rehearse on Tuesdays, typically.
And really those rehearsals, as I understand it, are to ensure any swings are up and ready, but really to see the backstage traffic pattern, because that's and changes for y'all.
That's right. And imagine, Josh, we don't even really, on that load-in Tuesday, we don't really get to walk them through it. We do an orientation in a rehearsal room where we talk through the changes. And if there is a particularly difficult one and somebody wants to walk through it, we will often facilitate that. But typically speaking, they get to be on stage for a little while during sound check, and that's when they're not singing sound check material, they're really paying attention to, oh, this is what they meant in the meeting. There's no step downstage right here. Imagine we go from city to city. Some cities have a crossover, some do not. And if you can just imagine for a moment, they do this in New York all the time, because the New York show, there is no crossover. The permanent Hamilton at the Richard Rodgers, there's no crossover. So they're doing a 3-hour dance-heavy musical, but to get from stage right to stage left, they have to go down to the basement, cross through the theater, and come up the other side. So they are some in-shape folks.
Well, we know how that works over at Stewart Theater.
Yeah, I bet I've been there. I've seen that. That's exactly right.
So exactly right. I do want to hit a couple more of these questions.
Yeah, please do.
Yeah. How did you know that stage management was what you wanted to do full time?
Yeah, Because when I walked into work every day doing stage management, I was as happy as I have ever been, and I could feel successful in the job. People responded positively to the work. I tended to be doing what I sort of believed the role was, and how I developed an approach for it. But really, to answer the question, nuts and bolts is, it never felt like work. That's how I knew. I just was like, I mean, truly, if we go back to that moment I was talking about, where I had a late night at the theater one night. I signed up for an extra loadout at a show at Taylor Theater, and when I came back home and I realized I hadn't even started on this nursing project, that's when I sort of realized, it was like, my heart is in one place and not the other. So that was for me.
Well, Seth also asks, how do you plan personally and financially for working these short contract employments? Do you ever stop looking towards the next job? As a stage manager at your level, what is the longest expected length of time on a contract?
Oh, man. So a typical regional theater show is anywhere from 5 weeks. So I'll give you an example. I do musicals at Casa Manana Theater here in Fort Worth, Texas. It's a regional theater. It's sort of get them in, get them out kind of musical is what I call it. We do a week of rehearsal, a week of tech, and run for 2 weeks. So that's, for me, stage management's 5 weeks. For everybody else, it's 4 weeks. And then Dallas Theater Center, a bigger regional theater, developing new work. That's typically 10 to 12 weeks per contract. And then from there, it can be anywhere from, one day stuff in the corporate world. Seth, it's you just save your money. I mean, you just have to save money when you get it. And the good news is, when you are working, it feels like you're making a decent living, which is exciting. And you just have to be smart with that. I know on tour, buddy, when I was smart enough to know that piece of advice, and I saved when I could save, every time I could save. And it is what has sustained me in leaving the tour and getting here to my teaching job in Fort Worth. And, you make those choices. I have a wife and daughter to take care of. And so I have to make those choices with those with those things in mind.
So we have a little less than 5 minutes left.
Gosh, is it already? Wow.
Yeah, so I did share a couple of images earlier, but when I passed some of these images to you earlier this week, you took a look at the load in, which is when we bring the scenery into the stage.
Yeah.
Of the
Look at this, man.
The double revolve, a donut.
Yeah.
Can you speak a bit about?
So listen, this is this might actually be at the Rogers. Is this in New York? I feel like this might be New York. One of the things that early on in Hamilton's inception, one of the hardest things they had to deal with was getting the turntable level and smooth. They had a really long journey with getting this thing balanced and working right. And they figured it out. Hudson Scenic did it. Shout out to those guys. Huge, awesome scenic company, does amazing work, and they've done a great job at keeping this stuff afloat, and really done a great job engineering. You sort of notice the way this thing is put together. It's smart because you can take it. Well, first of all, the tour, you have to take it apart, but it is designed in a way to be really compartmentalized. One, out of necessity. Two, out of thinking about maintenance, which is really nice. Yep, those are the two circles there, the outer ring and the inner ring. Cool. I'm happy to say one of the interesting things, Josh, that we just talking about Hamilton challenges is we ran into going from city to city, the humidity difference. So we track at our call desk at Hamilton Angelica, we have not only temperature, but humidity that we track and report on every night, because the stage level of stickiness or slipperiness is a huge safety concern. And so we need to know which way to go. We've done everything from, we put in 10 industrial dehumidifiers in one city because the deck was so sticky. And it sounds like an easy problem to solve. And I'm sure many of you out there are going, oh yeah, well, dehumidifying seems like maybe the wrong way to go. And why didn't you do slip no more? Trust me, we've been through it all. It's not as easy to solve as you may think. But that's a good example of a problem that you have when you move from city to city.
Well, we're going to ask the last question from our audience. David Jones asked, and it's also the question that we typically ask at the end of all of our Strictly Speaking. Any advice for a young student considering working at Disney was DJ's question, but any advice for any student or young professional looking to work in theater and stage management particularly?
Yeah, so I covered this a little bit. I'll just address the Disney thing specifically right now. If it were me and I were starting with that question, the very first thing I would do is try to find a resource at Disney in the technical department, in the production world. And typically Disney employees are very helpful in connecting you with people. Sometimes they respond well and sometimes they don't, so you may have to poke around a little bit. The college program is a great way to get in the door. Now, the college program, as I understand it, does not have the entertainment specific side of it anymore. It is more food and beverage and ride control and all that stuff. That is not a bad way to get your Disney experience and your foot in the door. And then from there, once you get on the ground at Disney, all of a sudden you have access to people who can really help you navigate who to get to talk to. And then Disney sort of has several ways that they can onboard you. Typically speaking, you've got one of two ways. Either you have to be experienced enough to be put on a cover, I'm picking an easy one, maternity leave. And let's say, like, when I had a chance about 2 years ago, right before I went on tour, to go back to Disney, and they basically had called and said, hey, if you're interested in this, we have a maternity leave coming up that you are qualified to handle. If you're willing to come back to Florida and work contract to contract for a little bit, we might be able to get you on full time. That's one way. The other way is you are a ride control operator and you have experience in entertainment. You submit to be what they call on the bench, and then once or twice a year they interview from the bench for positions in different departments.
Okay. Eric, I just want to say thank you very much for joining us tonight, and everyone here, thank you for coming out and support.
Guys, thank you.
This was great. Yes, I hope things are going well for you, and everything's gonna get better. It's only gonna get better. And thank you again for supporting us. And please do consider becoming a supporter for University Theater by visiting go.ncsu.edu support, UT support. Have a great night. Eric, take care.
Thank you so much, guys.